begrudgingly, the more I am disliking holidays that involve capitalism.
Yeah.
I'm just like, if you could get rid of the presents, I think it would be a good holiday.
Yeah, the presents, I mean, it's a tough thing. I mean, when it comes to like young kids, you know, they're usually pretty forthcoming and about expressing what they want, but it's always heartbreaking when, you know, when a kid says something like my neighbor is Santa Claus, you know, and he had a kid sitting up on his lap, and he said, "What do you want for Christmas?" He said, "I want mommy to be happy."
Yeah.
And that's like heartbreaking, you know.
Yeah. Well, and it's just like, I don't know. It feels like gift giving's gone from this nice little quaint thing of trying to get some nice trinket for someone to, holy jeebus, if you don't spend $200 per person, like, you know, your family relationships are over.
Yeah. It's very much like a race for that. And that's what the, you know, the retailers want, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, and I worked at Hy-Vee and Fairway for so long. Like, I am just getting to the point where like Christmas music isn't immediately nails on a chalkboard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
After listening to it, you know, day after day for months, it's just like, you know, for several years, it was just kind of kills it. But yeah, but to be fair, like it took me like probably this long before I start looking at fried chicken as a viable food source again.
Yeah.
So the key thing is here, don't work in the food industry.
Yeah, the food industry, like I don't know. I worked. You said you worked at Hy-Vee?
Yeah,
I did as well, but I worked just courtesy. You know, the lowest man on the totem pole, the lowest person. Yeah. Okay. I don't know, man. I thought that my job specifically, like at Hy-Vee, like I didn't think that. I don't know. Let's put it like this. I never thought of it like a career. Like that was what I wanted to do, but I always I look back on it fondly, I guess. You know,
yeah,
like
for the most part it was. Like I ended up, it was weird becoming like among like this large group of girls that worked there. Like the one person they always wanted to work with was me because I made things entertaining.
Yeah, that's the way of putting it, Andy.
Yeah, a little weird.
Except
like that girl in the deli who was like yelling at me and like the deli coworker because we both work like a 10-hour shift, and probably for at least 8 hours we're just talking about rare tropical diseases.
Nice. Were you both like bio majors or something? Or
no, he wasn't, but he knew some, and we both found the topic fascinating. So, which was really fun about this is, so he's in deli, I'm in the kitchen, so we've got at least a 30-foot distance. So we're talking loud enough. Anyone coming to buy anything hears us talking about Ebola.
Yeah, that's food. Not gonna make me want to buy food. Yeah.
Actually, no, my Hy-Vee gig was pretty sweet because I cut a deal with the manager to basically get some of the hours I wanted almost all the time. Because you know, I wasn't a sports person, and so I heard him talking about how hard it was for him to schedule anyone on Saturday nights because they always want to go to the football games and stuff. And so I looked at him and I'm like, I will work close every Saturday you've got that I'm in town, but I want something in trade for it. What I want is I don't have to work Sunday ever unless you critically need me. And he's like, yeah, I can do that. And so I worked 2 to 10 every Saturday through college, but I never had to work Saturday and Sunday, or at least very rarely.
Yeah.
So that worked out quite nicely. Partially because I got used to working at Fairway and never working Sundays, so I didn't want to work both days of my weekend.
You worked both at Hy-Vee and at Fairway?
Oh, yeah. I worked at Fairway during high school and then Hy-Vee when I came to Iowa State.
So which Hy-Vee did you work at Iowa State?
The big one, the east side one.
Okay. I think they're both big now, Andy. I mean, they're both pretty big Hy-Vees. I don't know. It's tough for me to, like, when people say which one. Yeah, I know the basic.
Yeah, I suppose we can add to the west one a bit.
I had no idea you also worked in grocery stores, because I worked in Hy-Vee growing up, but it was a very small Hy-Vee.
Yeah. No, that's what I did because I wanted to have nothing to do with the fast food industry. So
it's a better. I thought it was a much better gig than that. I did not like my time in waiting tables, but I look back on that very fondly. I also worked at like a downtown grocery store, and I didn't think that was too bad. So everybody wants to hear us talk about this. I'm sure that like
I didn't even notice we were on air.
Well, we've been on air for like 6 minutes. I tried to tell you, but I think you were talking when I said it. So Trent is here now. Welcome, Trent.
Hi.
All right. Well, I've got here the list of things that we're going to be going over. Trent, if I understand this correctly, it would appear as though you are going to be taking over the topic, and then for that reason, we'll be kind of punting the review in lieu of you being. Okay. If you had a game,
the reason I decided to do this is because I actually had a top 10 list ready, obviously. So why not?
Yeah, I'm right there. I love the idea. Do you want to also? Did you have a game for review that you wanted to throw on here?
It's fine. I would actually probably prefer to wait. So.
Okay, sounds good. All right. Well then, here we go. 3, 2, 1. Hello and welcome to The Good, the Bored, and the Ugly, a podcast about board games. I'm the host of The Good, the Bored, and the Ugly, Joe Sallin. I'm joined tonight by Trent Ham, our special guest, who's going to be giving us his top 10 games of 2018. Hey, Trent, how's it going?
Pretty good. Let's do this.
We got this. And it's not just me tonight.
Co-host. He's now only special guest.
And he's the special. He's the is special guest. I'm pretty sure that special guest is like an added honor in addition to being co-host. Andy Dennison, by the way, who's only a co-host for this one, is already showing his jealousy. And
Trent, what he's telling you is this is your last time on The Good, the Bored, and the Ugly. That's what he.
Wow, thanks, Andy. Thanks for anything else. Here, I'll just keep talking. You can go ahead and say, what do I really mean when I say this game is fun? Andy, would you translate that for our listeners?
The rational people should not buy it.
Actually, there might be shreds of truth in that. And I didn't accept, like, that was impressive for coming up with that right on the spot. By the way, if you've never met me before, I tend to take a bit of a hardliner stance when somebody describes the game as being fun. I want more. I want more than just that, and especially if you want to use that as the only thing that you have to say about a game, I'm going to be very skeptical. And as Andy said, if I call a game fun, you should take that with a grain of salt and take that as definitely it could be an irony. I don't know. I guess I just don't know. But speaking of fun games, Trent's going to be giving us his top 10 games of 2018. Trent, is there any fun on that list, or hopefully
no? It's fun free. I mean, it's my list.
Fun free list. So this will definitely meet my expectations, meet the quality standards here at The Good, the Bored, and the Ugly, which is
obviously it meets Andy's.
It's just pain, just salt, just vinegar.
Oh, vinegar, pain.
Just guilt. What else, Andy? Guilt and destruction, melting away the future.
Yeah. For a long time and still to some extent, my criteria for was an extremely good game session was how many Advil I have to take afterwards.
Yeah, I remember that. It's like
I finished Mage Knight. I got all the rules right. I need Advil.
Andy, give this game. Well, that's a really dangerous scale. To give this game four painkillers. It's like ridiculous. How about we just stick to 4? What is it? What would be a better one? 4 brain cramps. 4.
What's the percentage chance you've lost a relative playing this game? Will no longer speak to you ever again.
How many burned bridges? How many ruined friendships?
Yeah, that'd probably be good.
Oh boy. Well, before we get to the rest of our show, thanks to our sponsor, Game Surplus. Check them out at GameSurplus.com, where you can find great gifts for any gamers in your family. The newest hotness, as well as many hard-to-find imports, and a lot of what's due in the pipeline from Essen 2018. As we approach 2019, check out those games, which I'm sure you'll be enjoying long into the rest of this year, which is kind of how I am for my top 10 games of 2018. If anybody's like on the edge of their seat, just don't expect it anytime soon. It's going to take some months before I can finally catch up with a lot of these games that are coming out. But Trent, it seems like you've been keeping kind of an on top of the games that look good to you. And
I'm always going to add for Game Surplus, kind of like a personal recommendation. I was looking there a couple days ago, and I saw they still had. It looked like several copies of 18 Lilliput, which we all really liked. So if you're wondering,
might be on somebody's list, Andy.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. Anyway, I just wanted to mention that I did notice they had some. So.
Yeah, they got some of those, and if you just on the main site there, you can see everything that's been in recently, and I think that's a great.
Much of my list is available from GameSurplus.com.
Well, that's a pretty strong plug. So check them out. And anyway, before we get to Trent's list, we're going to start off with reviews of what we've been playing recently. Of course, after Trent's list, which is the main course of this episode of The Good, the Bored, and the Ugly, we will be finishing off with some with some hypes. So stay tuned for that. And now, starting off on our review, on this slew of reviews, is going to be a solo game, I believe, from Hollandspiel that Andy's here to tell us all about.
It's not solo, but it plays solo well. It's a 2-player, but you can pretty easily play both sides, like they do in a lot of kind of war style games.
Oh, that type of solo. Okay, you were soloing this before, and I presumed that was the type of game this was. I have erred in my ways.
It's supposed to be 2-player, but I haven't ever really tried it. So I tried it a couple days ago, and I just actually finished it up this morning. So the game I'm talking about is Supply Lines of the American Revolution, the Northern Theater, 1775 to 1777. I like titles like that. All right. Anyway, so this game obviously takes place in the American Revolution. It abstracts the war element quite a bit. So you have different sort of like, you'll have the British, you have the Patriots. You're going to be battling each other, maneuvering around. But the main crux of the game is not that it's a fighting game. Fighting is very much the more minor part of it. The main part, as the title says, is supply lines. So you have cubes that are produced within cities as long as you have units in them. You have food and you have war supplies. So food you're going to need to move your armies around, and war supplies you're going to need to actually affect combat, because you can't fight an army if you don't have any guns. And so you have to utilize that. What makes this cool is you have to have a continuous route of supply. So as long as you can trace a pathway to the supplies, anybody can use those supplies. So if I have my main army is 6 spots away from a city, as long as I got one unit in every path to that city, I can run all of the supplies from that city down to my army. If, however, the supply line is cut, I can't do that. And then I'm stuck with whatever I'm carrying. There's also a bit of asymmetry in it. So what I noticed kind of practicing, like the British kind of have a powerhouse advantage. Like their military is better, as historically accurate. When they get into combats, typically to cause a hit, a British just needs to roll a 1, 2, or 3 on a 1d6, while the Patriots have to roll 1 or 2. But then again, the Patriots get another form of combat that the British don't. So they can do skirmishes where you just like send in a couple people, take a couple crack shots at them, and run away. And what I found kind of playing it is if you set your big British army up in a non-fortified location near a Patriot army, and stay there for any length of time, like the Patriots, they're only rolling 2 dice, and it may only be a 1 or 2, but if that adds up long enough, they're really like taking it out of you. But they're very asymmetrical in other ways. So like with the Patriots, to get more of their troops on the board, they have to basically draw chits out of a cup, and whatever chit they draw, that town gets 2 reinforcements as long as they have control of it. While the British, to get in reinforcements, they got to bring them in from England. And so they get these little chits, and you take one off, and that's the set number of troops you get. You're going to generally have more than the Patriots, but it's a real problem to get more of your troops in, because every time you throw a chit away to get more troops in and more supplies, you have to conquer more victory cities to win. So it's like, where do I stop, right? And in fact, if you're going to get everything you can possibly get as the British, like the extra leader, all of the chits, when you pull in that last requisition for supplies, if you don't win that turn, you lose. So you better be, thinking you can really pull this off. But
pressure's on.
Yeah, the pressure's on. And the thing that's really interesting too is that like you almost never want to engage in combat, it feels. Like you're sitting there going, oh God, if I play this too conservatively, I'm going to lose. However, if I stick my neck out, I could really get hurt. So like to actually win the combat, not only do you have to roll better, you have to have more units. So if like, an army with 8 units moves on your army with 2, it doesn't matter how well those 2 do. Like he's probably kicking you out of that area. And you have to commit to combat anyway. So like one thing I was doing with the Patriots was every time the British would try to engage me, I would just pull back and pull back and make them extend their supply lines out, spending units on their supply line until I thought I could take it or make them stop. And then the other thing is like, as the Patriots, you kind of don't want to be near a British city because they're going to like kick you in the teeth. But at the same time, if you're the British and you move that army into like a non-city space next to the Patriots, they're like, time to skirmish battle, which you can't do anything about. And I'm going to just kill your units from the woods. So it's this really like push and pull. It really is all about moving those supplies around. If you like misjudge what you're going to need, and you can't get a correct path to it, like it can be a really bad day for you because you can have the biggest army in the world, but if you don't have any gunpowder or food to feed them, what are you going to do? Army marches on its stomach. So it's really about like trying to find a way to engage in conflict while achieving your victory conditions, all in a way that you think you can win, but it always kind of feels like you can't. So like every move is a real tense decision. So I really like this. It played very well solo, even though it's a 2-player game, because it's all perfect information. Like, so that you can easily, and it's pretty abstracted and pretty easy. There's no real bluffing in the game to speak of. So every kind of move you make can make sense. So it's pretty easy to play both sides if you're so inclined, and was actually a pretty enjoyable experience. So anyway, that's Supply Lines of the Revolution, the Northern Theater, 1775 to 1777. They also
is that title so suspicious? That title is so suspicious. Jeez, I can't talk right now. It's so specific. It's so specific. Is this because there's going to be more in this series? Do you know, or?
Yeah, there is one more right now, Supply Lines of the Revolution. The Southern Theater, I don't remember if that one has dates on it. But that one plays differently. It's got that base core of the system, but it does a whole lot more with like naval possibilities because that was a bigger deal in the South. There's also a lot of partisans. So like in the Southern Theater, there wasn't like as much, stand-up military fights. It was a lot more to do with like people in their homes running out and taking people out and these partisan actions. And so there was that to deal with. In the Southern Theater, there's also sieges. So if you can surround a city, they have to keep removing food. And like if they remove all the food, you just take the city. So there's a lot more things to do with that. Yeah, so it looks actually really cool as well. So I'm kind of interested to do that. It's over there sitting in my pile too. So,
Trent, have you played this one at all?
I have also soloed it. I'll be honest, it's been a long time, so I really can't comment too much on it.
Okay, fair enough. All right. Well, thanks, Andy, for telling us about the Supply Lines of the American Revolution, the North Theater, 1775 to 1777 by Hollenspiel. All right, I'm going to give you guys a quick first impressions of several games here. I just had a wonderful little vacation to a cabin in Wisconsin with my family, and we got to play many games that I had been had been sitting there on my shelf of shame, and I finally got the rule books read, and I got them kind of prepared, and we got a good chunk into those games, some really great experiences here. Nothing is going to go too in-depth, though. let me start with Wendake. Wendake is a 2 to 4 player Euro game in which players are going to be selecting actions. You'll always choose 3 actions per round out of a randomized 3x3 grid of action tiles that you prepare. And these actions that you take always must go in a tic-tac-toe row, column, or diagonal type setup. So you get to choose the order that you take these actions, but the actions themselves have to fit in the same line. It's a very restrictive system that immediately called to mind the game Targi, which I have played and really enjoyed. It's an excellent little 2-player game that has a sort of as you're playing, the board becomes extremely more constrictive as you play. The difference is in Targi, you're blocking each other, whereas in Wendake, the main area in which you interact with other players is that this entire system of a Euro game at its core, a slick, easy-to-learn Euro, is fueling a simple dudes on a map, get to places, install people as production, assisting you with harvesting and catching, hunting beavers. Basically, what you'll be doing is moving your warriors out and then sort of like turning them into the civilians that are taking over the production and giving you resources when you take actions to harvest. All in all, the actions that you'll be taking to move about the board involve a deterministic system of interaction with other players in which you can choose to fight. And if you choose to fight, it's like Imperial 2030, where just one guy kills another guy. There's really not much to the system aside from that. However, you do have different superpowers in this game, variable player powers, and they are representative of the tribes, which I haven't even gone into any of the actual historical background. This game is about the Great Lakes Native American tribes, that large tribe known as the Huron, and then many smaller tribes that made up the Iroquois Confederacy. Fun fact, the United States is kind of based on the structure of the political structure that the Iroquois Confederacy used, at least to a certain extent. It's kind of a cool, each of these different peoples were represented, and the way of life is really at the core of the systems in Wendake. The way that you win this game is by having, there's 2 different competing tracks, and there will be, there's 4 different competing tracks, and you group them in 2s. And then you'll take the lowest score on each of those 2 tracks. So you have 2 different things that you kind of have to maximize, and you want to get the most points possible from that track. You'll do the same thing in another sphere. All of these pieces, in my first impression of the game, felt like they came together very nicely. The way of life of these Great Lakes Native American tribes was at the core of the experience. I really enjoyed that aspect. There was one mini game that I thought was especially just kind of, I guess, uninspired, and that's the way that the masks work in the game. If you ever play this game, the mask system I felt was just kind of a bit of a tacked on element. Like everything else feels like it really relates with other elements there. All these different well interlocked game systems that make for a heavy experience. And then there's like this the mask mini game, which is just really, in my opinion, kind of boring. It's just a simple get sets. And it reminds me of the shipping action in Trajan. If you've ever played the game of Trajan, the game itself is, in my opinion, a very excellent game, but it has one action that just, to me, is lackluster, not as interesting as the rest of the game. It's a simple set collection, and that's kind of a similar structure here in Wendake. So I do have a little bit of a criticism for just the way that doesn't interlock with the rest of the game, but I do find that Wendake as an overarching experience is extremely well designed and developed to the point where it's very easy to teach players how to play the game. What you're doing makes sense. It's intuitive. The way of life of these people is the centerpiece. It makes me feel like this is kind of like their version of Agricola, at the same time as this was happening in Europe, as Agricola is happening in Europe, a little bit, fast forward a little bit, and you see this happening in the Great Lakes Native American tribes and just their way of life. Now, there's an expansion upcoming that I'm really excited for that's going to add more about the French and Indian War, which was ongoing during the years of this game. So the expansion looks to do more about that, and I do think that just overall, my first impression of the game is very positive. I look forward to exploring it more, and like I said, a very tight system at its core, a very tight Euro-y system that then fuels a dudes on a map conflict that also has the same sorts of Euro sensibilities to it in terms of being very deterministic and very intentional and very strategic, rewarding strategic play. But just overall, I really enjoyed this one. Have either of you guys gotten a chance to check out Wendake at all? Kind of a mid-heavy Euro, I would call it.
No, I've just heard about it, but yeah, that's all really. So it's what do you say, Great Lakes tribes?
Yeah, and the way that the actual map works is imagine Kemet. You know how Kemet has all these like kind of gerrymandered sections to make it balanced? Like imagine that, except the centerpiece of this map is like the mitten of Michigan, which if anybody's from Michigan and you're listening to this, you know that whenever you show people where you're from and you live in Michigan, you hold out your hand like this and you show them where on the mitten you're from.
Yeah.
So that's this map.
I'll have to check it out because if I remember right, I'd read some history of some native tribes in there, and it was like really fascinating their version of democracy they came up with. And I wonder if that's the same tribes. So yeah,
it probably is, dude. It was an advanced political structure.
I bet it was then, because yeah, they had this total democracy set up between different groups and like who could outvote others and how like an idea had to pass from one group to another. It was really cool. So yeah, I'll check that out. I'm cool.
This one simplifies that specific aspect, Andy. So it's not super political. It's very much a Euro game at its core. But the actions you're taking, as it says in the historical handbook, they're supposed to represent like the tribal elders, you know, and that influence. So I found it very intriguing. We were in Wisconsin, so we were kind of traveling from one of the home territories. My little brother played in the home territory that's basically Iowa on the map. And I took the Quebec area. By the way, check out the Bridge City Board Gamers, our Canadian cardboard cohorts.
You're just saying they finally joined the chat.
check them out. By the way, yeah, Quebec. That Norm is a Quebecer. I think they have a name for themselves. But anyway, Quebecois. Okay, so. Basically, yeah, you should play this, Norm, because it deals with that conflict. And by the way, right now, me and Andy are playing A Few Acres of Snow, which is all about that conflict at its core, which basically the expansion to Wendake adds A Few Acres of Snow's overarching conflict more into the game than it already is. Because it's present but super abstracted and only effective if certain progress tiles come into play, which allow you to develop an alliance with one side with either the British or the French. But aside from that, it's basically, you know, it's really a Euro game. But I like the pieces here. I want to show you guys this game sometime. I think that it'd be you guys. I don't know what you think about it. I don't think it's quite at the Madeira level, Andy, but I do think it's somewhere around Nippon. You know, where it's a very intriguing system. About the way that business is working in Tokyo. Well, this is about the way that the Great Lake tribal life. You know, just the way that they sort of developed and what they did, what they traded. You know, what their life was like. All right, so that was the first. Now the next one's going to be significantly shorter because I have much less to say because I only have one short play of Duelosaur Island, which is the Dinosaur Island 2-player game. Now, I've not played Dinosaur Island yet. I know Boo Hiss, but I have read the rules, and I would say that Dinosaur Island as a whole looks to be a larger, more involved experience than Duelosaur Island. Duelosaur Island is much more about, in like the Castles of Mad King Ludwig, how you have the master builder that sort of determines for the round how much everything costs. Well, imagine a 2-player game where you're drafting several things, but you're drafting rolled dice and modifiers to those, which are determined by the first player, but then the second player gets first pick. It's a nice little way of doing an I pick, you choose, because the rest of these game systems here are not as intriguing as that core, like roll a bunch of unique dice, a very great component, by the way, the amber dice in this game, and then you set them up with different, what they call plot twist tokens, but really they're just kind of bonuses or modifiers to what the dice are. It could be a ×3. So you got to be careful. You got to try to be judicious about how you set everything up because you got to kind of plan things so that your opponent will take the thing that that benefits them least. It's a really cool system. I really enjoy it. So far, I'm seeing it as being maybe like a shorter version that reminds me of like Seasons, the game Seasons, which I quite enjoy. But Seasons has a lot of different game systems going on. It's a very involved experience, especially at the higher levels. It can be really intense. But Duelosaur Island looks to have a lot of replayability, a lot of variance from round to round, and just offering you some nice like decisions that have you trying to not just think about what you need, but then how to get it without having your opponent take it right before you can. I really like the way that you set up the dice here. Have you guys ever? I mean, first of all, anybody played Dinosaur Island?
Nope.
So there's nothing here. Dinosaur Island, Trent, I think that's one of those like a heavy game. I guess if TC were here, I'd definitely recommend it for his daughter Kate. And I think he has played it actually. I think TC has recommended it to me pretty strongly. But it's
like the one with like the techno neon colored.
Yeah, it looks like 90s
okay,
pink and blue. Mm-hmm. And it really does. I mean, it evokes that sort of, like an arcade sort of look from the 90s pretty well. I think that the art style is nice. I mean, when I think of this game, though, I think of Jurassic Park, and Jurassic Park did not have that sort of a 90s weird, like pink and blue.
Jaundice.
Yeah, everybody likes Jaundice. So I really like Duelosaur Island, though. I don't know how much. I mean, I think that really it's that central core mechanic of trying to sort of get what you want, but divvying things up in a fair way. It's like that I split, you choose, just carried out to a little bit more. So I really
I know that's a mechanism that I think Ludology podcast was saying they really wish that you'd seen in more games.
Well, they should check this one out because it really is like trying to sort of program how to get what you want from this game. So it's very much what's on display here. And the final of the games that I am going to be talking about is actually one of those consumable style games. So like it comes with 5 crime stories. The name of the game is Detective: A Modern Crime Game, I believe. But it's by Ignacy Trevicek, did the game design. There's actually an author that did the writing of the actual mysteries on display here. But I got a chance to play a game of this, and the game mechanisms are very simple. They have you investigating different elements, different scenes of a crime, and then you're spending time. So it's much like it's like I would say a more intuitive version of like Sherlock Holmes, meaning that it's not quite as difficult. Like the puzzles tend to be a lot more like, I would say that your amount of leads and stuff is going to be a little bit more clear than they are in Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes has just the whole wide world to explore, and I think that this gives you a lot more context before it makes you make some decisions. And so read that as I suck at Sherlock Holmes, and so do the groups I play with tend to struggle. However, Detective: A Modern Crime Game seemed a lot more like at the level that we were able to consume. Now, we still sucked. We still got low ratings. But I found that the writing of the mysteries really drew me into its central, the central case for this first of 5. And it also not only did that, but it made me interested to see what direction they go into the future. So that's why I think Detective: A Modern Crime Game, I'm very interested in what it's doing so far. It's a very simple system, but I do feel that the writing itself is pretty high quality. You can tell that it's actually been handled by like a professional author, and it also tends to involve the furthest advances. At least I'm not even sure if the technology that's showcased in the game even exists for real. Like I'm pretty sure that it does, but it's like it could be so advanced crime technology that like they could just be making it up for what I know. Like how the like essentially the computer enhanced crime databases, how like you essentially can search for offenders in a much reduced amount of time.
When they do DNA tests in 15 minutes.
Yeah, that type of thing. So this one has one player is supposed to be sitting behind a computer, kind of like using the database. And we found that like for my brother, that really helped. As he tends to be like, your stereotypical millennial who's like glued to his phone. Well, we gave him a computer to look at, and he ended up kind of putting together a lot of stuff on his own, and it gave him something, where he could, sort of do some research on his own and then report back to the group. So it was a nice, I'm not saying that's going to work that way for every group, but it was kind of a nice thing that worked. At least we found a way to make it work in my family's group that was playing this. So all in all, Detective: Modern Crime Game, basically it's CSI, the board game, but it's CSI in a consumable campaign form where it feels like you're watching a connected season. So it's like, you're sort of Manhunter season 1 or something. I really enjoy this. Or I'm thinking of Manhunter season 1. What is the one? There's one that's on Netflix, the Criminal Minds or something, Mindhunter.
So at what point in the campaign does like the serial killer kidnap the woman, and like the guy who has like the awkward romance with her has to go save her?
Not there just yet, Andy, but it very well could get there. I mean, the way that the different characters in the game, the way that they have it structured, there are times when you read a card and it's like, okay, things are like we just learned some pretty juicy information. Like this is a pretty big deal. So there's some pretty big knowledge bombs that made it interesting to continue to dig through the online and in the physical, components, the cards that you read. So we did a lot of writing. I'd like to take my hat off to my dad because it said in the rule book to try to organize your thoughts as like a mind map. And my dad did this with while we were playing, he was listening to everything that was going on, and he was just making this huge, just an interconnected, like we were trying to trace what happened to this watch. And he's like, okay, well, it started here, and he just kind of traced along all these different steps. And it was really cool when it got all done. If I showed that, it would be a spoiler, but like my dad put together a mind map, and it was one of those things where, I've never seen anybody do that with a crime, and I thought it was kind of cool to see it all come together. So if you're looking for that type of an experience, Detective: A Modern Crime Game is I think, going to deliver exactly what you're looking for. But I've only played one of the 5 cases, and we wanted to play more, but it is a very long and involved game, so keep that in mind. You need a long time to play this. It took us about 3 hours.
That's long.
Yeah, Andy. So, with my parents and the way that most people that play board games don't play the 3-hour, 6-hour games. This is one of those things where if you're going to be playing it with a group, have them understand. I don't think that it's heavy. I don't think it's that. Yeah. I just think that it's like, especially make sure that you're communicating with each other.
Mm-hmm.
That's the biggest thing.
That's kind of like cases in Sherlock Holmes, or some of the escape room games take us a lot because we want to work through it, a little more casually and take longer to think and stuff.
Precisely. That is absolutely it. All right. Well, welcome, by the way, to everybody who joins us here today. We have Dylan. We have had Norm. Norm's here. And unfortunately, some of our mainstays, we don't see them right now. But you know what? It's great to have you guys, Dylan. It's great to have you, Norm. And anybody who joins us in our chat here, you might get your name blasted to everybody that listens to this. So
we're missing Murr, but I think he got taken by Krampus.
Murr might have been taken by Krampus, yeah. Looks like Dylan was telling us about his top 10 games and whether or not there's overlap with any of Trent's. So getting to share with our listeners about what games that we talk about that what are your experiences with them. Always appreciate that. Thanks for sharing there, guys. And now let's actually get to Trent's list. We've talked about it. We've prepared you for it. Well, Trent, you had some criteria, so let's let you start it off by introducing your list and saying what criteria it had to meet.
Okay, so I sat down and we were discussing the topic of having top 10 games of 2018, and I was thinking about what that would mean for me, and I decided that my criteria would be it had to be published in 2018, and I used Board Game Geek as the determiner of the publication date. I must have played it multiple times. Means I have to have played it at least twice, bare minimum. And it's not basically just a reprint of an earlier game, so that eliminated games like I decided Brass Birmingham qualified there. I decided Container Jumbo Edition or whatever qualified there. I decided the Estates qualified there. So they're basically all reprints, so I didn't count them. And then I basically went through and took I tracked my plays, and then I used the list of games that qualified at that point and just ranked them. Generally, I ranked them by how excited I was for another play, but I made a few exceptions to that. But in general, is how excited am I to play this again, having played it twice. And that's pretty much how I ranked the list. So what happened is I found that this made it biased the list towards shorter games that are easier to get to the table, because there are a lot of heavier games that I might have put on this list, and I thought about it, but it's hard for me to get 2 plays in. There's a lot of them I have 0 or I have 1 play that I just couldn't do it. It didn't make any sense for me to include. I'd only played it once. I don't really feel like it's in my top 10. And I think that this list might change if I went back and revisited it in 3 or 4 months, but this is where I'm at now. Sure. I wanted to throw out some honorable mentions really quick that covers some of those categories. So, like, games that are functionally reprints that I thought about were Brass Birmingham, the Estates. I decided 1822 CA was basically a reprint. I thought about that one a lot, so I decided to count that as a reprint. Endeavor, Age of Sail, reprint. Container 10th Anniversary reprint. Those are all effectively reprints, so I didn't include them on the list. There were a number that I just hadn't played enough that I probably might include if I give them at least another play. The big ones there would be Space Corps and Cataclysm of Second World War. And then number 11, the one that was really tough for me to exclude was Blooms, which I talked about a couple episodes ago.
Yeah.
It's the abstract. And the reason I excluded that is because I only played it on a hex board with 4 hexes on the edge. And I want to play it on bigger boards because you're supposed to be able to play it on 5 and 6 hex boards. And so I feel like I've only played like the mini version of it. So I didn't feel like it was really fair to include it. But I am excited to play that on a bigger board.
Sounds like you got some pretty good games there just on your short list. Cataclysm of Second World War, we talked about that at length on the long view, and it sounds like that's quite an interesting and engrossing experience for people that are looking for something different from a war game about the entire theater of the war.
Yes, I've been very excited to get that played more.
So, starting off, we have number 10.
Okay, my number 10 is Fort Sumter, The Secession Crisis, 1860 to 1861. It's published by GMT Games, designed by Mark Herman. It's a 2-player game, plays in about 20 to 40 minutes. It's a war game that I guess it's kind of an abstracted war game, I guess I would say, that portrays the secession crisis that led right up to the start of the Civil War. Hence the name Fort Sumter, which was the location of the start of the actual military conflict of the Civil War. It's a fairly small box game. It has a small abstracted map of the United States as it was at that time. But the game is very abstract. There's one player that's the Union, and one player that's the secessionists. And it's basically an area control game is the way I would describe it. You take turns playing cards, and it influences the amount of control you have in various areas on the board. And then as the game goes on, you count points based on those areas. I'm very much simplifying it, but I would say that imagine something like Twilight Struggle simplified down to a game in which each player only plays 9 cards. You basically, each player plays 3 cards per round and puts aside a 4th for the end game. And then you have 3 rounds like that, and then the end game uses the 3 remaining cards, and that's it. It literally takes 25 minutes. But it's got a lot of replay value. I've played this 5 or 6 times, I guess. And each time I keep discovering new things about it. I've discovered there's a lot of subtlety in the card play. A lot of times the card that screams obvious to you is not the card you really should play, because a lot of other things change the board around in ways that are better for you long term. The things that like might be a huge punch in one region isn't maybe the best thing. You might want to do something that spreads out your influence in a bunch of regions. Just lots of little things going on that I've noticed all the time. And like with any game by GMT, it's got a lot of nice historical notes, pretty historically accurate. And I've just been enjoying playing it. And if you like games like Twilight Struggle, but want something that's shorter and in a little bit of a smaller box, this is one I'd highly recommend.
Sounds really cool, man. I hope to get that one played and check it out.
Yeah,
Sounds like
I played it a couple times. It's pretty good.
Very cool. Moving on to number 9.
Number 9 is Yellow and Yangtze. It's designed by Rainer Knizia for 2 to 4 players. It takes 90 minutes-ish to play. This is one where I thought about it as a reprint almost, but I decided it was different enough than its obvious predecessor, which is Tigris and Euphrates, to count it as a different game. Because it really feels a lot like Tigris and Euphrates, but it smooths out the rough edges of Tigris and Euphrates. I felt like when I played Tigris and Euphrates back in the day, you were mostly just trying to get the big home run face punch for the win, and one player got it, and that player won. Whereas this one, I feel like is more of a war of attrition over time. And so I tend to like this one more. It's like I said, it really has replaced Tigris and Euphrates for me. So what this is it's a very abstracted version of the Warring States period in China, which is basically a period in which there were 4, I guess, smaller kingdoms fighting over the nation, and they eventually unified. But this is about the period of warring kingdoms. So basically, you're placing tiles on a board full of hexes, and you're giving different leader types. These are like big wooden chunky tiles, and they have different abilities as you place them on the board. They represent your leadership in a particular color. If you lead a particular color at the end of your turn, you get a cube of that color. And the person, at the end of the game, you collect these cubes behind your screen. At the end of the game, you count up your cubes in each color. And whatever your lowest number is your score. And whoever has the highest of those numbers wins. It has a lot going on. It's very area control-ish. You're often trying to set up a position where eventually the little states you're growing are going to merge into each other, and it's going to have a conflict. And you're trying to put yourself in a position so you win those conflicts, so you can take over the space ruled by other players. And so they don't get cubes anymore, and you do. And that's how you win, basically. Like I said, I found that Tigris and Euphrates could be described almost exactly the same way, but there were little changes in design here that made it less break your back, going for the single one-punch man win, which is often how I felt about Tigris and Euphrates. This one feels more war of attrition, like you can still come back if something bad happens to you. And I like it because of that quite a bit. And that's Yellow and Yangtze. Highly recommended.
Yeah, I have very positive things to say about this game. I've played it now about 5-6 times, and I would say that as Trent said, the traps that you could lay for players, especially if there's a discrepancy in skill level, and the traps that players inadvertently set for each other when they don't know what they're doing, led to Tigris and Euphrates being an anomaly as just a wildly strategic game, but one that is extremely difficult to crack into just with how heavy the system is and how intensely people are able to really master it. I find that Yellow and Yangtze is much more accessible. There's many more things to consider and many more ways out of the messes that you might accidentally find yourself in, and would agree wholeheartedly with what Trent said there. And I think this one's really good. I think this one would probably pop up on my list whenever it does finally happen. Andy?
Yeah, I don't know. It may or may not make my list, but I think I would agree with the general feelings. I think my general idea is that in almost all situations, I would rather play Yellow and Yangtze. I think probably Tigris and Euphrates would probably be the better game only if everyone at the table was a moderate to high skill level, roughly equal to each other. I think if you had all of that, I think probably Tigris and Euphrates is the more interesting deep game. But if you don't have that perfect storm of things going on, then Tigris and Euphrates is just not fun, in my opinion. Whereas Yellow and Yangtze, I think if you're an experienced player, I think you're probably going to win over like a newbie, but the things click easier. Like you can be less experienced and still potentially pull out the win if you play kind of intelligently. So, and there's more things to do. Like if someone sets up a perfect storm of like getting lots of cubes, like if you allowed someone to do that, it's because you weren't paying attention. There's plenty ways to kick over people's anthills if they're trying to do stuff like that, where it just didn't feel like there was in Tigris and Euphrates. Yeah. So yeah, I would agree. I think in almost all situations, I would rather play Yellow and Yangtze.
All right. Well, that's number 8. And now, or wait, that was number 9. And now, number 8.
My number 8 is Crusaders. That will be done by published by Tasty Minstrel Games, designed by Seth Jaffe, who we've had on this podcast in the past, and designed one of my favorite games, Eminent Domain. It plays 2 to 4 players and plays in about 45 minutes, probably. It's an area control game themed in the... area control is probably not quite the right word. I don't really know what the best way to describe it is. The board game describes it as area movement, so we'll go with that. It's themed on the Crusades. You're one of 10 different holy orders that are trying to spread Christianity throughout mostly through Eastern Europe. And you do this by basically you have a night, or you have 2 nights at the start of the game, and eventually you have 1 night at the start of the game. You can eventually get up to 3. You're moving them off from Western Europe into Eastern Europe. As they go through, they build buildings and they go on crusades. It's not as vicious as you might think. You're mostly just getting influence points when you crusade. You're not like butchering people or anything, because the theme could be a little questionable. But you're basically competing for influence as victory points in this game. There's a ton of influence. Almost everything you do gets you at least a couple influence, and as you start comboing things, you get lots of influence. In a 4-player game, you start with something like 280 influence in the bank, and the game ends when that tool is depleted, and then you dump out more, because during the last few rounds, people are going to be getting like 20 or 30 influence if they've been setting up right. What makes this game click, and it's really interesting about it and why I've really enjoyed it, is that there's this rondelle mechanism. And so the game has variable player powers. As I mentioned, there's 10 different orders. And what the 10 different orders do is they give you a slight tweak on how you use the rondelle. If you've ever played the game Trajan, the rondelle will feel kind of familiar, but it's got enough tweaks to it that I really enjoyed it as a puzzle on its own. So normally, by default, there's 6 slices on your rondelle. It's like a little wheel you have in front of you. And each of those pieces is double-sided. Players start out the game with the less powerful side of each of those 6 slices, and they're set up identically. And by default, you have 2 tokens on each of those slices at the start of the game. But that does depend on which of the 10 orders you are. Some of them have fewer. Some of them only have 11 pieces that are distributed among the 6 slices. Some of them only have 10. One of them has 13. They all have different benefits, though. Because in this game, you choose one of the actions on your thing, you do it a number of times equal to the number of pieces that are on that slice of the pie, and then you pick up those pieces and distribute them clockwise throughout your rondelle. So like you dump one of them on the next piece, and one of them on the next piece, and one of them on the next piece. And if you go all the way around, you might end up putting a piece back on the one you started with. You get the idea. It's not pretty straightforward. But what's interesting is, if you don't like what your options are in front of you, you can literally spend a turn flipping over one of your rondelle pieces. And on the other side, it's got, rather than having one ability, there's 2. And so in the future, when you choose that slice, you're going to distribute the points towards either one of the actions that you want. You can effectively do 2 actions. And so it makes the puzzle a lot more interesting. Some of the variable player powers make it interesting. Sometimes you're going counterclockwise. Sometimes one of them lets you skip one as you drop them. It's like you're going to drop one in the first piece of the pie and the next piece of the pie, and then skip the third one if you want, and then jump to the 4th one and 5th one and 6th one. So every turn you're trying to do long-term planning with your rondelle, but there's a lot of permutations that the game gives you in terms of a puzzle with that rondelle. So you sit there thinking about it because it's just your own private puzzle that you have. This game's almost multiplayer solitaire. It's more the really interactive parts, the race to the sweet spots on the board. Mm-hmm. But a lot of it is sitting there and puzzling out this rondelle, and it's a really clever little puzzle that I've fallen in love with. And that's why it's on this list. This has a lot of elements that I probably wouldn't normally like in a game, but that rondelle is just amazing. It's a really well done game mechanism. If you like puzzles, this will be the kind of thing you like. Because I find that when I play this, I'm sitting there staring at my rondelle during the entire time all the other players are taking their turns. Because I'm like permuting out all the different ways I can do things. And I really enjoyed that every time I played this game, and that's why it's on my list. And that's Crusaders Thy Will Be Done.
Very cool. I've not played this one yet. Andy?
Nope. I honestly, when Trent said something about it, that's the first I ever heard of it, but it sounds interesting.
The components are really pretty.
I was impressed by how quickly you played this, Trent, and the things that you're saying about this sort of Mancala puzzle aspect, that seems to me like a very efficient form of entertainment. I really like Seth Jaffe's other stuff, so hopefully I'll get a chance to play this.
I found, for me, that the game flows really quick. Like, it's like a 45-minute game. It looks like it's going to be longer, but it's really not. But yeah. I found, for me, it felt like there was no downtime, because by the time I'd puzzled out what I really wanted to do for the next few rounds, it was always my turn again. In fact, I was often APing the start of my turn. So
that sounds cool, though.
Yeah, I've enjoyed that. That's what I really enjoyed about it.
Yeah, like it sounds like there's just no downtime. Very cool. Well,
that's what I really like about like Terra Mystica. By the time I get to my turn, I'd be like, no, I'm not ready
The board doesn't radically change, so you actually are incentivized to start thinking about your next turn as soon as your last turn's done. But the worst thing that can happen to you is someone rushes up and takes the spot you really wanted. But then there's a bunch of other spots nearby that are usually pretty decent, so it's not disastrous. You can still kind of more or less do what you were planning. The goal is really to optimize your rondelle, and it's a good puzzle. Okay.
Nice.
Onwards
and downwards. Number 7.
Okay, number 7 is an 18-card game. I'm really not kidding. It's Sprawlopolis. It's published by, what does he call his company these days? Button Shy Games. There we go. Yeah. I couldn't remember what he had actually ended up calling his company, because that's Jason Tagmeyer's personal kind of like printing label. But this was actually designed by a team of 3 people: Stephen Aramini, Danny Devine, and Paul Kluka. This is like I said, it's 18 cards is what this game is. And it plays from 1 to 4 players. I tend to find it's best as a solo game, as a quick solitaire game, but you can definitely play it as a group with a little simple modification. So the game consists of 18 cards. On one side of each of the cards is 4 city blocks with some sort of road going through the city blocks. The blocks have 1 of 4 different possible colors on it. It might be orange, or there's like a residential, industrial, commercial, and like parks, I think is the other one. And I'm not sure about that. I just remember there's 4 different types. And what you're trying to do during this game is you're going to be laying these out on the board, and they all have the same orientation, but you can flip them 180 to do it the other way. And you start out by laying one in the middle of the table. The next one you can lay adjacent to it, or you can overlap it. And then the third one, you can do all of that the same. It doesn't matter whether roads connect or not. It's generally good if they do, but if they don't, it's not a big deal. It's just losing a point or something like that. What's interesting is you play this with 15 cards, because at the start of the game, you turn over 3 of the cards to the other side. On the other side of each of the cards is 1 of 18 different scoring rules. And it says, like, okay, you get 1 point for every segment of your longest consecutive road. And then the other one will be like, you get a point for every the largest contiguous section of residential areas. And the other one might be, you get a point for every commercial and industrial area that alternate. Every time you have a pair of them next to each other, you get 2 points. And your goal is, but they all have a target point on them. So like one of them might say you have to get 16 points. The other one might say you have to get 14. The other one says you have to get 12. So what you do is you add those 3 big numbers together, and that's your target point total for the game. If you get there, you win. If you don't, you lose. And so the whole thing is just a puzzle. It's a solitaire puzzle is what it is. It's like playing effectively a game of solitaire. You're sitting there looking at the card, orienting it, trying to think of where it fits on the grid. It's a very nice little spatial puzzle. What I really like about it is it's 18 cards that fits in your pocket. I carried this in my pocket for months. It stayed in my hip pocket for a long time because I could pull it out at restaurants. I could play it by myself. I could play it with my kids. Because when you're playing it with your kids, and rather than normally you have a hand of 3 cards and you choose to play one, and then you draw another one, and then you play one, and you draw another one. If you're playing multiplayer, everybody has 1 card that they hold. And when you play a card, you pass the 2 to the player to your left and draw one, so you're always holding one. And you're playing as a co-op, so you're kind of thinking together about it. So it's a simple rule to make it into a co-op, but this is a really sweet little solitaire game. I highly recommend it. It's available for like $12 from Button Shy Games on their website. Yeah. Well worth the $12 if you ever have a need for like a good 15-minute solitaire game you can carry around in your pocket. Sprawlopolis.
I've never tried this one. You, Andy?
I haven't tried Sprawlopolis. I did get Pentacork for them, and yeah, similar thing. Like it's just a nice little puzzle that you can essentially carry anywhere. The one they're gonna do, I'm really interested in, is Travis from Low Player Count came up with an 18-card train game, and that's like due to be published by them. Like called Penny Rails or something. So I'm kind of interested in that one. I saw this being played at game nights, but yeah, it looks like you look at the but yeah, I think if I was going to enjoy it, I think I would prefer it as a solo over a co-op.
Oh yeah, it's definitely better as a solo. I don't even debate that. But the thing is, you can play it as a co-op if you're sitting there with a couple other people. And basically, you're just what it amounts to is you all end up puzzling over it together.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was number 7. So now, number 6.
Number 6 is Temporal Odyssey. It's a 2-player card game. It can be also played as 4-player. I have not played it in the 4-player version. It's designed by Chris Solis, published by Level 99 Games. It's a nice little, fairly small box game. Takes about, BGG says it takes 20 to 45 minutes. I'm saying it's usually on the 45-minute end of the scale. In my experience, it's very rarely, I can't conceive that it's regularly done in 20 minutes unless someone really messes up. So it's a card game. Basically, it's kind of a hand-building game, really, is the way I would describe it. Because you start off with a few cards on the table in front of you and a very small hand of cards, and you're drafting cards each round off of 3 different decks. There's 3 different styles of cards, I guess would be the way to say it, in front of you. They're called past, present, and future. And they do different things, but suffice it to say what you do is at the end of each turn to get more cards is you pick one of those piles, you pick it up, you take one of the top 3 cards, you trash one of them, and you put the other one back so your opponent has a shot at getting it. And you just choose off the top of those 3 and you alternate turns. And the gameplay is kind of like Magic, but it's actually a mix of Magic and Netrunner, is the way I would describe it. So you have only 4 actions you can take on your turn. And most of the time it's either like playing a card from your hand usually takes an action, or doing one of the abilities of a card you already have in play takes an action, or something like that, or doing some sort of an attack takes an action, those types of things. And once you've done your 4 actions, your turn's done and you do the draft. But at the end of your turn, you essentially organize your cards into what are akin to Netrunner servers, except they each only consist of 2 cards. So generally what you're doing is use some big fat guy that like has a lot of health to stand in front of the guy that if they actually killed it would be very bad. So in this game, you have a guy that's like your main character. He's like a time traveler. And thematically, again, the weird theme. It's a level 99 game. The theme's bizarre because it's level 99. That's what they do. But you have the main guy, and he's able to get killed 3 times. And each time, the 3rd time he gets killed, he's dead. But the first 2 times he gets killed, you actually get a really nice bonus card. So what that ends up doing is you end up playing almost every game I've ever played of this. It comes down to whichever guy's going to kill the other guy first. And generally, you're using guys to protect him. You're using things to distract so they can't attack him and things like that. And then you're just knocking each other's defenses down. Joe, you've played Codex. This is kind of reminds me of a simpler Codex where it's not this gigantic tome that you slap on the table, but it's actually a fairly small box game. It has that same sense of drafting throughout the game, except you have a shared Codex is kind of the way it feels.
Huh. I really do like Codex quite a bit. You know, that's a game that I still have it. I still think it's a really cool idea. Like you said, it's a giant tome that you slapped on the table, and it feels very intimidating unless somebody's going to, essentially tackle an entire CCG in one huge wave. But yeah, the Temporal Odyssey sounds like a more digestible version of Codex.
It's a more digestible Codex. Codex is probably a better game, but this one's like a fairly small box game, and it's fairly easy to teach, and it's got some really nice decisions. The 4 action limit is what really makes it interesting for me, because that feels a lot like Netrunner, and that was one of the appealing things for Netrunner for me. You couldn't just sit there and go, la-di-da-di-da, I'm doing some infinite combo, because you only had 4 actions. There's only so much you can do. It's the same thing here. You have to decide what's the best use of these actions. So the turns go back and forth pretty quick, other than people APing because they're trying to figure out how to use those 4 actions. And it plays out, like I said, I would say 45 minutes is usually a good number. I've enjoyed it quite a bit every time I played it. I find that it rewards a lot of replay. Like every level 99 game, the past, present, and future decks are dynamically generated at the start of each game because you're only using a subset of the cards possibly available in the box for each of the past, present, and future decks. Each of the characters you start with has different sets of cards that you start with. There's like 9 or 10 different characters. So there's a lot of replay in the box. It doesn't feel like you're playing the same game over and over again because there's enough mechanisms going on that all of them feel different. My wife and I think that one of the characters might be broken. I'm not gonna. It's not going to be reused by us again, I don't think. But we may just be bad at the game. I don't know. But it's got a lot of interesting things going on. And if you like two-player dueling card games, I really recommend giving this one a try. It's pretty widely available out there for a pretty expensive price. I see it a lot of times the $25 range. And it's well worth that. And it's Temporal Odyssey.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. All right, that's number 6. And now, number 5.
Okay, number 5 is 18 Lilliput. I kind of alluded to that earlier. That it was going to be on my list. So 18 Lilliput is a 18XX game, sort of. We'll get into why it's sort of in a bit. It's designed by Lonnie Orgler. It's by his own publishing house. It plays from 1 to 4 players. It actually has solitaire rules, which is how I managed to get a number of plays into this. The community says it's best at 3 to 4, and I'd probably agree that it's better with like 4. I think it's probably best at the full player count, but it's interesting solitaire, and it's been fun to play that. It takes, I'd say, an average of 90 minutes per play, which again, 18XX is very, very low for that. It does not have a board. It's just all cards in a little fairly small box. But it has a lot of the elements of an 18XX game. You're buying stocks, you're laying rails, you're building stations, you're counting, you're figuring out your best route, you're buying trains to put in your companies. All of those typical mechanisms of a typical economic 18XX game are all there. But the board is made out of cards, and it's built dynamically as the game goes on. You don't have a fully set out board. I tend to feel it as though it's like a kind of a fog of war kind of thing. Is how I tend to feel with games like this. It's like the whole board is there, but you can't see it yet, and that's the way it simulates it. So you lay out the cards, and rather than being able to just kind of do whatever you want on your turns, your actions are restricted by some action cards that are available to you. So you're going around, and players are drafting out of this pool of action cards, and they're taking one of the 2 actions on the card. And then you're doing a snake draft each time. So if you're going first, you get your choice of all of them. But when you go last, you don't have much of a choice left, and they're usually crummy and don't match what you want to do. And you're trying to make the best out of the other action. This has a lot of what I like in 18XX games on it. It's not as deep as any of them. It's definitely the lightest 18XX I've ever played, but it plays at 90 minutes, and it's in a small card box, and it's approachable enough that this will probably be the one I use to start introducing my kids to 18XX. I think this would be the very first taste I would like to give them before I move on to an actual full game like that. I think this is a good one to bridge the gap between someone that mostly plays Euro-style games, and you want to give them some idea of what an 18XX is without plunking them down before 1830 or something like that. The time commitment's relatively low. Like I said, 90 minutes-ish is about right. And it really is a pretty fun game. I've enjoyed playing it solo. I've enjoyed all my plays of it with multiple players. I'm looking forward to playing it again. I feel like one of the characters is the strongest, and notably so, and I'm not going to talk about which one, but you can decide that for yourselves, because the game has characters that are kind of like special player powers that you draft at the start of the game, and I think one of them is stronger than the others. I'll just put it that way, but again, I might be bad at it. It's one of those fun things to talk about, but I don't want to spoil it for anybody. And that's 18 Lilliput. If you want a nice introduction, very Euro-friendly introduction to 18XX games, I'd give a look at this one.
Yeah, I think my general feelings of it, having played it, looked at it, is going to be what you think of the game's going to depend how you approach it. If you're like a hardcore 18XX player and you approach it from the 18XX world, I think most people approaching it that way have been disappointed, and I can totally see why. But I think if you're approaching it from the Euro side of things, moving towards the economic, or if you really want to find that thing that bridges the two almost perfectly, I think this does that. So I think you're going to have more enjoyment if you kind of come from Euro to 18XX that way through this than you would be 18XX to Euro, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I enjoyed this one, so take that for what you will. Many people will listen to that and think, okay,
I can play it with Joe, and he doesn't cry over his poker chips after 8 hours, so it's good.
No, I still cried.
Oh, there was crying. Yeah, far less. Yeah, when we were done, Joe's like, I would actually play this one again. So
yeah, I'd say most of the ones. I'd say that almost all of them that I play with you guys, I'd be like, I would play again unless. Like I feel like I was learning about where exactly I stood at the time. But yeah, I like 18 layer put quite a bit. I think that, keep an open mind is the only thing I would say. Try to keep an open mind. And if you don't feel like you're capable of keeping an open mind, if it's that close to your heart, then just enjoy, what you already like and don't worry about playing this one. I enjoy 18 Lilliput. Let me have this one.
Yeah, no, for sure. I feel like there's 2 games that, are essentially coming out here that bridge the Euro 18XX route pretty well. And I think 18 Lilliput is your light to medium bridge, and then City of the Big Shoulders is like more of a heavy Euro 18XX bridge, I think, at that point. So it kind of depends which way you want to go. I would say that 18 Lilliput feels more like a train game than City of the Big Shoulders does. But they both bridge that gap pretty nicely. So it just depends. I think if you're wanting to explore what that stock market kind of game feels like, if you're a heavy gamer and you're a heavy Euro gamer, you might want to go City of the Big Shoulders. Or if you really want to see what a train game feels like or kind of medium light, I think this is probably your best bet.
Very cool. That was your number 5, Trent, and now number 4.
My number 4 is Rising Sun. Rising Sun is a game published by Cool Mini or Not. Yes, I have a Cool Mini or Not game on my list. It's designed by Eric.
More than I do. We'll put it that way.
Yeah. Designed by Eric Lang. It plays theoretically 3 to 5 and 3 to 6 if you have the expansion. I think that this should just be strictly 4 to 5. I think 6 is too many and 3 is not enough. It plays Board Game Geek claims 90 to 120 minutes. I'd say more like 40 minutes per player is probably what I would say, because it definitely goes up with more players. This has a lot of stuff going on in it. It's definitely a dudes on a map game. You're fighting over. It's got a very tight map where you're trying to fight for area control on the map because it's effectively how points are won in this game. But it's set up so that there's all kinds of points for player negotiation. It's really heavily about player negotiation. The players are going to negotiate with each other all the time over various elements of the game. There's actually a phase where you're formally making alliances with each other. And when you make an alliance with another player, they get additional benefits from the things that you choose to do on your turn. And they benefit from what you do, and you benefit from what they do. So that's pretty intense. You don't necessarily want to ally with someone that seems to be in a really good position because you might just further their win. So generally, like if you're an ally with someone that's in a really good position, they have to be bribing you. And there's a lot of backstabbing in this game. This is a very player confrontation heavy game. You got to accept that. I've seen 2 different people basically rage quit during this game at various points. It's got a very strong player interaction because people are blatantly making alliances right in front of you to hose you, and you got to be expecting that in this game. That's what's going on. It's got a little bit of like blood rage. Like there's some variable player powers floating around. Every faction has a variable player power. You end up taking drafting, in essence, more variable player powers throughout the game to make yourself a little more of a distinct empire. It's got a very heavy, very beautiful artwork, very heavy fantasy Asia theme, I guess I would say. Very non-culturally specific, but generically Asian. I really enjoy it. It's got that kind of diplomacy thing going on. To me, I put this in the same place in my heart that I put a game like Game of Thrones, the board game, and that it's diplomacy's in there, but there's a lot of other elements going on to soften the blow and make it feel more like a Euro. But I tend to just still pretend it's diplomacy.
It's a diplomacy you can actually get other people to play.
Yes, because no one really wants to sit down and play actual diplomacy with me. They're like, we're going to end friendships. But this one's a little bit softer in that regard. I think it's not quite as mean as Diplomacy, but it's definitely got a lot of alliance building and a lot of like groups are clearly working against you. Things like people are going to backstab you, that type of thing going on in this game. Beautiful big fat pieces and art and everything, and I really enjoy it. I found that the most fun I've ever had with this, is the reason it secured such a high spot on my list, is the one time I've had a chance to play it where everybody knew what they were doing and had played it before. Best experience with this ever.
Okay. Yeah, it has a lot of rule question cases, like cases, and
if everybody knows what they're doing and there's no need to teach and everybody actually knows the game, this is a fantastic experience. Holy crap, I loved it. I loved it, loved it, loved it. I would do that any day of the week. But trying to find a situation where everybody knows the game and has played it and is willing to play it again, and someone hasn't rage quit or something like that, is a rare opportunity. So
yeah,
that's the type of experience that's near and dear to my heart, and that's why I love this game. But getting there in my current life situation with the players I have available is a little tough. Yeah. But it's there, and it's going to be high on my list. I think with a different group, this could be number 2 or number 1 on my list. Okay. If I had available different players that were more willing to dig into this.
Yeah.
And that's Rising Sun.
Yeah. The one thing I liked on it too was that those yin yang chit things where it was like it was really clear who was going to be allying with who.
Yeah, so they blatantly show you what the above the table alliances are on the table. There's sometimes some below the table alliances, but there's definitely above the table alliances. So I mean, when you have a direct ally that gets benefits when you take actions, and you get benefits when they take actions. That's how yin yang things. Awesome mechanism.
Yeah. I like the way that it visually represents it as well. I think it's a very cool piece, Trent.
Yep. This is one of those games that would really, if you got a group of players that's willing to play a game several times and really likes intrigue and diplomacy and backstabbing and stuff, and enjoyed games like Battlestar Galactica and I don't know, I'm trying to think of other ones, like even Game of Thrones, the board game, that type of thing, you need to play Rising Sun right now. Get that game now. So that's about all I can really say about it. If that sounds like a horrible nightmare to you, avoid Rising Sun like the plague, and don't let anyone ever make you play it, because you'll just make it miserable for everybody, you yourself included.
Yep.
Yeah, you don't want to call 911. It wasn't pretty.
Yeah, just don't.
It was quite that bad.
Not
I think that bad. Joe was there, I believe, one time when one player, one of the rage quits happened.
Yeah, it's just a bizarre, like it's weird because it feels more personal when the game involves that element of negotiation. There is like a social element to it, and especially players that are fairly new to a group can, depending on your temperament, if you're somebody who takes things seriously and personally, it can be very difficult. So, but even if you found that, like, that's not necessarily the way that what you're looking for, I still think that Rising Sun, it has a lot of chrome on it that makes it worth trying. But just understand going into it, don't take anything personally. So I really like this one a lot, Trent. I think that it is, I think that what you've said about it, how it incorporates negotiation at a much heavier level. Like, I'm a big fan of Blood Rage. I'm one of the masses of individuals that doesn't want to say it, but I do really love Blood Rage. Maybe that's more my style of game that I would rather teach people. But if I had that situation, like you said, where everybody knew the game, I'm sure that Rising Sun would be an absolute blast. I still own it. I really like it, and I'm not getting rid of it. So maybe that's, an indicator of whether or not it will be on my eventual list. And that was your number 4. So now we're down to the big 3. So let's get it started off with number 3.
Number 3 is Keyforge. It's a 2-player card game designed by Richard Garfield, published by Fantasy Flight Games, a game that takes about 30 minutes. Keyforge is the game that a lot of people have been talking about, where it's a game like Magic, where you have a deck of cards and you're dueling against another player, and you draw cards and you play cards and you draw more cards and you play more cards and you turn them sideways to attack each other. It's that type of game. It's designed by Richard Garfield. The thing that stands out about this is it's collectible in a certain way, but not really. This game is sold in completed decks, pre-constructed decks. It's the only way you can get into this game. You don't buy single cards. There's no singles cards market for this. You buy a deck and you play with it. And the reason that is because every single deck ever printed for this has a unique back. 36 cards in that deck have a back that no other deck will ever have. And so you can't mix and match cards. This is your deck, these 36 cards. So the challenge of this game is you get a deck and you learn how to play it. You learn the ins and outs of that specific deck. You play it against other players. You learn what it does well and what it doesn't do well. If you decide you really don't like it, you can trade the whole deck, sure, if you want. Or, I mean, there actually is weirdly a secondary market for complete decks. I can't believe this exists, but there is. But you can. I have traded decks with people. I've traded a couple different decks with people because I've figured out what kind of decks I like and I know what to look for in them. Like, I can look through a deck and say, this will either work for me or I might as well not even bother at this point. But there's a wide variety in deck styles. There's controlling decks. There's very aggressive decks. There's decks that seek to just take your opponent's resources. There's decks that seek to slow down the game. There's decks that seek to speed up the game. There's combo decks. There's all kinds of different play styles that are available in different decks in this game. The gameplay itself is basically every deck has 3 different houses. Every card in it is got a house that is associated with. So every deck of 36 cards has 3 different houses in it, 12 cards each. At the start of your turn, you name a house. That means on your turn, you can only use cards from that house and only play cards for that house. But there's no lands or resources or anything. If you're playing cards from the house, there's no cost. You just play it. There's no casting cost, none of that mana, no land screw, nothing like that. Say I've chosen House Shadow. I say Shadow at the start of my round. I have 4 Shadow cards in my hand. I can just play them whatever order I want. I have a few Shadow cards already in play. I can turn them sideways and attack you if I want. All the other cards are irrelevant. They don't do anything. They just sit there. But when my turn comes back, my opponent's turn comes back around, they may want to attack those guys. They can attack any of my guys. What you're trying to do on your turn is at the start of a turn, if you have 6 of the currency in the game that you're generating by doing the various things in the game. You have 6 of them, you remove them, you get a key. As soon as a player makes their 3rd key, and you can only do this once at the start of your turn, you win the game. So a minimum, the game should take 4 rounds, although there are some combo decks out there that can do it in 2 or 3 if they get really, really lucky, and the opponent just sits there and waves at them. It's fun because it plays so quickly. You don't really need a lot of components for it. It's fun because every deck is different. You don't know exactly what you're going to be playing against. And like a Magic tournament, you'll be playing carbon copies of the same deck because everybody's figured out the quote meta. That's impossible with this. Every deck is different. You can't play the same deck over and over. And plus, the game's designed well enough that different decks appeal to different play styles. So a deck that I love and I play really well is nothing like what my son plays. He plays something completely different well. And we've learned this by playing games of it. We've figured out what we're good at. I can't speak more highly of this. It's really a genius idea. It's a way to make it feel like you've got something really unique without having to go out there and spend $800 putting together a constructed deck. You just go out there and buy one Keyforge deck, $10. There you go, play it. Mm-hmm. There'll probably be someone around to teach it to you. Playing it is fun. Figuring out what's good and what's bad about a particular deck you have is fun. If it doesn't work for you, you can probably find someone to trade with. In our local area, most of the people have several decks, and I have 3 or 4 that I'm pretty much always willing to trade. So there's that going on. It's a really amazing game. I'm impressed with what Fantasy Flight has pulled off here. Not only is it a good game, it kind of feels like it's solved the collectible problem in a way. Mm-hmm. By making each deck unique so that you can't just assemble your best deck. So you don't have to seek out individual cards. You just take a $10 deck, learn how to play it well, and you'll probably do well at Keyforge. Mm-hmm. And that's really awesome to me. And so it's my number 3 game of the year. And it's probably my most played game of the year. In fact, I'd almost guarantee it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say, I have yet to play the game, but I'm still kind of interested in trying it. But it seems like the idea of this is being marketed to people essentially like me who don't really like the deck building aspect or the deck construction aspect of so many living card games, and also don't want to spend stupid amounts of money like most collectible card games. And from what I've been told and people that play it is like, and there's no need to even buy a starter set. There's none of this buy 3 core sets crap that you typically have. Like I saw online, I think a couple people playing it, and they basically went to Hobby Lobby and bought a bunch of those like yellow glass beads for amber and a couple things, and we're like going to town with it.
Yeah, I mean, you can use just some bits you have around, and that's all you need. Like, as long as you have some sort of generic tokens, you're good to go.
Yeah. And I don't know. I thought like the Shut Up and Sit Down review of it was kind of amusing because one person
absolutely excellent review. That is a super high quality entertainment. Andy, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, but he like one person really liked it, and I think it was Quinn's really didn't. And he's like, I can't recommend the game. However, I recommend you try it because $10, like the lowest barrier to enter in a game ever. Because you buy a deck, you play a deck. You don't like that deck, quit the game or buy another deck.
Or trade the deck. I mean, I've actually witnessed some deck trading. So
right. So like to me, it feels like this is a card game from Fantasy Flight that's being marketed more to people like in my boat who don't really want to get in depth, don't really want to play in tournaments. Although potentially you could, it looks like they're going to do that. But you could buy 1 or 2 decks and just have 1 or 2 decks and be perfectly happy and never have to worry about having more. Or you could go collector crazy with them and do that and enjoy that. Okay. So I don't know. Out of all the Fantasy Flight card games that have come out recently, well, in the last few years, this one probably intrigues me the most as something I would actually invest in, just because the investment level is low.
So the way they're doing some tournaments for this is really cool, and you might actually be interested in this, Andy. They're having sealed tournaments for this, but it isn't just where everybody goes and gets a sealed deck and plays it. That's not how some of these are going to work. What they're going to do with some of these is everybody who participates in it buys a deck, and then they open one up and then randomly choose a player, and then they start auctioning that deck off. So that, you've seen all the decks that are available. They hold one up and they start auctioning it. What you're auctioning to play with is drawbacks on your own gameplay. So what you're doing is you're restricting the amount of cards you're able to draw during the game. Mm-hmm. That's your bid. So like you bid for the first 6 turns, I'm going to draw 1 less card. For the first 7 turns, I'm going to draw 1 less card. For the first 8 turns, I'm going to draw 1 less card. That's what your bid is in this auction.
Mm-hmm.
And then, that's effectively how I'm simplifying just a little, but that's what effectively the bids will be. So if you see a deck that you think just nails how you play and you really want it, you can just start bidding it up. And then if other people don't care, you'll get it cheap. If other people want to bid you up, you might end up having to play that deck with like a hand of 5 cards rather than 6 or whatever. Yeah. And that makes it harder, but you get the deck you want.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of cool. So
yeah, I find this whole idea pretty interesting. Like, because other than I think I played the Lord of the Rings one, but like, yeah, the barrier to entry and the issues with all the other LCGs, CCGs, and stuff that have come out, like this one just doesn't have that baggage. So I'm intrigued by it.
Very cool, Trent. I played this one. I enjoyed a short couple of games of it, and I do think that there is a lot to explore here. It is a unique system, and they pulled it off, and people are responding to it, especially in the board gaming community, in a very positive way. I think that it kind of gels well with the idea of inclusivity and trying to lower that barrier to entry to the collectible card game hysteria. So that was your number 3, Trent. And now, number 2.
Number 2 game of 2018 is This Guilty Land. It's designed by Tom Russell, published by his own imprint, Hollandspiel. And the only way you can get this game is the Hollandspiel's website, just FYI. And that's because of the theme, which we'll get to in a minute. And it's a 2-player game, plays in about 45 minutes to an hour. And it's a 2-player card-driven game, but it's about the political struggle over slavery in the United States in the decades right before the American Civil War, about 1820 to about 1855 or something. as the nation was gradually getting further and further and further apart and divided over the issue of slavery. This kind of represents that and how that evolved. And that is a really sensitive topic, one that could get very uncomfortable in certain crowds. But I gotta say, this game handles that topic with maturity and respectfulness, and is done better than I ever thought it could have possibly thought it was done. I was really impressed with how they handled a difficult theme like this. It feels like one of those themes that, unless you're really confident in your design, you probably wouldn't want to touch it because it could go bad. But this design really nails it. It really handles that difficult theme well.
And I think it's important to stress, and you kind of did too, that the focus of the game is on the politics of slavery, not the institution of slavery.
Yes. Having said that, having played the game on both sides of the political struggle, I genuinely felt like when I was on the side of justice, which is like the anti-slavery faction, I felt like the good guys. I felt a moral imperative to win. When I was playing as oppression, I genuinely felt like I was the bad guys and I was trying to do something that was morally wrong. And I've never really felt that way in a board game before. It was really interesting playing that, because I felt that every time I played this, that when I'm justice, I feel like I'm in the moral right, and on the oppression, I'm in the moral wrong. And that's really interesting. So
yeah, this is a similar feeling too, just to kind of add into that, because the first time I played this was with you, and I was playing oppression, and I was really trying to grok the system. And so about halfway through the game, the system clicked. I'm like, oh, this is awesome. I'm doing so well. And then I looked at my card art, and then I started thinking about what I'm doing. I'm like, I feel awful about the thought that I'm loving this. Like it elicits emotional responses.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So this is, like I said, this is a card game. The board mostly consists of a representation of Congress. The board represents different regions of the country and how those regions are represented in the Senate and in the House of Representatives. And as you're playing the game, you're trying to pass various laws. The laws generally cause victory points to either flow. Basically, honestly, they would cause them either to flow quickly or slowly into the coffers of the oppression faction, because it's very hard to get in a situation where victory points are flowing into the faction of justice. And it's easier during the game for the bad guys, quote bad guys, to accumulate points. During the game, as you reach game end, they're going to have a pile way more than the other side, and that's by design. That's how the game works. Mostly, justice is trying to slow down oppression. And oppression is trying to put the pedal to the metal and get lots of points. The game starts off feeling like oppression has all the advantages, and justice is just trying to slow things down enough. Because at the end of the game, whatever justice still has managed to get good control over and a lot of influence over, they're going to get a bunch of victory points for, while oppression gets nothing. So justice gets almost all their points at the end game. Like 95% of their points will come at the end game. During the game, there's this display of cards off to the side. You're going to be choosing cards from that display. Some of them are going to go into your reserve. Some of them are just going to get played immediately. They generally have the effect of changing the dynamics of the board. They're changing favor in each of the regions on the board. And as favor changes in those regions, at the end of a round, they'll change the current standing in the House of Representatives and the Senate. Effectively, you're trying to change the hearts and minds of people on the ground, and the way that is represented in the game is that by domino effect affects the House and the Senate balance. Early in the game, oppression has all the control in the House and the Senate. As the game goes on, that pendulum can shift a little. I think it's very hard for justice to actually get control of things, and I think if they have, they're going to win by a mile. Mostly, justice is trying to slow down the onslaught. A lot of it is very clever card play. Mechanically, this game's really interesting. There's a lot of clever card choices because the cards are all kind of a lot of the cards, not all of them, are kind of multi-use. When they're out in the card display off to the side of the board, they have one use. If you get them into your reserve, so you have a kind of a private hand, although the hand is face up, they have a different use. this game is perfect information. There's never anything hidden at any point. With one exception, you don't control the order of which the cards come out of the big fat deck into the play area. That's random, but that's other than that, it's a perfect information game. It's just amazing in every way. I would sit down and play this again and again and again with a willing opponent. The theme, like I said, handled masterfully. It's a very difficult theme. It might make people feel uncomfortable, especially the first time you see the box art. The box art's almost shocking. It depicts a slave who has got scars on his back, and it's almost a shocking picture to see. This game is meant to elicit emotion and conversation, but it does it with really strong game mechanisms, and it's amazing. I'm really amazed by this game. I really considered putting this at number 1. I debated it a long time, but the other game would have been at number 2 had I made that decision. And I mostly went by which one have I played more. And so that's how I made the decision between 1 and 2. But this game is really amazing and highly deserves your attention. That's This Guilty Land by Hollandspiel. The only place you can get it is the Hollandspiel website because he's only selling it direct. He doesn't want stores to have to deal with selling this. And I don't blame him, honestly, the designer. So you have to go get it directly from the Hollandspiel website.
Yeah. I would echo those feelings as well. I would. Right now, I would say this game would be in my top 10 games, period. Definitely in my top 5 of this year.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Well, Trent, you alluded to it, but what is your number 1?
My number 1 game of the year is Root. And like I said, the only reason I sat there and thought a lot about which was number 1 and which was number 2, and I mostly went with Root at number 1 because I played it quite a few more times. I played Root a good 15 times now, maybe more. It's quite a lot of plays of it. Root is a war game for 2 to 6 players. The base game is 2 to 4 players, but the expansion adds 2 more factions. You can play up to 6. I think you can probably try to play it with 7, but I wouldn't wish that on anyone. In fact, I'd only play it with 6. Ooh, I don't even really know I want to play this with 6. I was thinking about that. I would say the optimum player count for this is 4. Okay? It's published by Leader Games, designed by Cole Worley. Cole has been on our podcast in the past and alluded to this game when he was on it. And yeah, it's pretty amazing. This game is an asymmetric war game, is the best way to describe it. It's a war game in that there's dudes out on the map and they are going to be killing each other. And that does earn you a few points, but it's usually not the main way you earn points. The main way you earn points is, well, it really depends on your faction because this game is wildly asymmetric. To the point where it genuinely feels like the different factions are basically playing different games. Like, it's like you're each playing your own game and interacting in those games on the same board. Because the things you are doing as each player are way different. There's one faction is basically building like a command line. It's like a programming game like Robo Rally. Another faction starts with nobody on the board and has to slowly build up resources. And then there's the Lizard Cult, and no one really understands what they do. They supposedly do stuff. They kind of do stuff. There's another faction where you literally are represented by one guy that runs out on the board and trades with people. There's another faction that literally all they do is, well, I guess the one big guy doesn't really trade with people. He more goes in and steals their stuff. He's kind of like he's actually a raccoon, so he steals stuff. There's another faction that literally does trade with people. They set up their own little market economy and trade with other people's unused fighters. That's what they use for resources, is other players' unused fighters that they trade to them in exchange for goods that they can use themselves. And you just feel like you're playing a different game no matter what you're playing. Are you playing an economic game? Are you playing a programming game? Are you playing a smash face game where you're trying to build up a logistics network? And the thing is, they all manage to work together. They all have the same... They all go on this map together and interact with each other and have some combat rules that explain how they fight each other. And you're all going about this the process so you can get to 30 victory points first. And somehow all of this works as a functional game. And that's the really amazing part. Like you choose any of the factions, any 4 of them, and sit down and play with them, and it generally functionally works as a game. And it's amazing to me that this can work. But it does, and it works really, really well. It makes you want to. I want to play the same game again with the same faction sometimes, and every permutation I played with this has been interesting and different. The factions work so different that they practically feel like they're playing different games. The art is really cutesy. You got this kind of Beatrix Potter thing going on. I love the art style that the game uses. It looks very friendly and approachable. So these adorable little wooden animal meeples. Like, everything about this game is just nailed. It's just done wonderfully. I can't speak more highly of it. The only reason, like, this became #1 over My Guilty Land simply because of play count. Like I said, I've played this like 15 times now. But I am still excited to get it to the table. And the thing is, I still find people that are wanting to get it to the table because a lot of people feel the same way about it as I do. It's just an amazing design from top to bottom. I can't recommend it more highly. And that's Root. It's great. Play it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I highly recommend playing it as well because I loved this game. Andy, what do you have to say about Root? Andy, nothing to say about Root.
Oh, I was just making sure my internet was working. Trent was speaking like a robot on my end, so.
I think Andy, it is.
Yeah, no, Root is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Root is good. This is one of the few games that I'm being so wrong about. Because I was like, oh, cute animal care, and then I played it. I'm like, game now. So can't recommend it enough either.
Yeah, Trent, I think you have both of us on your team here. I really enjoy Root. I think that it makes the system of asymmetrical but very in-depth interlocking variable powers. It takes that sort of a system that you might recall from like a coin counterinsurgency style game, and it makes it digestible, and it takes out all the anything that would cause newer players to, like get hung up on. And I still feel like there's a lot of hurdles to overcome in learning this game, but like I feel like there's steps there that you can take to get people into it. It makes for a really unique experience. I mean, there's just nothing like this in board game form, and I feel like this is just a continuation of what Leader Games has been working on with Vast the Crystal Caverns, which I feel like was the tech demo for Root.
I would agree. I think that Vast was like a warm-up for this, so.
Which totally different, different designer, but just, those same sorts of sensibilities of what direction they're pushing towards. Very cool work being done on both of those games to get to the point where we've got something like Root, which has just such unique gameplay, so much variation within the box, and enough to keep players coming back to it. It's one that, people don't turn this one down, even though it has like a lot of moving parts. It moves really fast. So I really like this one a lot. Any final thoughts here on the list, Trent? What was your hardest decision to make? Was it you mentioned #2 and #1?
#2 and #1 was really hard. Debating over what to do about blooms is really tough because I really, really love it as the hex four-sided. The board has 4 hexes on each edge. I really like that version, but I don't feel like I can really include it without having played the actual 5 and 6 hex version. So I feel like I've only played like Blooms Jr. And I find that amazing, but I have the feeling if I was to make this list again in a few months, Blooms would be on it somewhere in the middle. Maybe even like 4th or 3rd, I don't really know. But I think it would definitely be on this. It was hard for me to exclude it.
Makes sense. Well, thanks for sharing your list, Trent. I found it very intriguing, and I feel like there will be some overlap, but then there's definitely gonna be some new ones on my list. The main limiting factor: games you've not played. There are certainly some games I'd like to ask you about, but is there any specifically that you've not played yet that you feel like 6 months down the line could absolutely make it on this list? Is there anything that you see as one that you have your eye on as potentially cracking it?
Captains of the Gulf.
Okay, yeah, I would like to try that one as well.
if you're asking me, that's my immediate answer. One that I haven't played, but I could see end up being on this list in 6 months is probably Captains of the Gulf. It looks really interesting.
Have you played Teotihuacan?
No, I have watched. Well, I played part of a game at Gen Con.
Okay, so you did a little demo of it.
Yeah.
Okay. That's the only one that I would have asked because just knowing that you did enjoy, I believe you enjoyed Sulkin, like knowing your familiarity, sure maybe you did appreciate that game. I'm not really sure, but I really did love your list, Trent. It just seems like full of interesting games. Just wondering if there was any unplayed ones.
Oh, there's several unplayed, but the big one I would say that I could see ending up on this list at some point would be Captains of the Gulf.
Mm-hmm. All right, very cool. Well, thank you, Trent. And now we're going to move on to a bunch of hypes from me, from yours truly. So sit tight while I tell you. I guess to start with, I'm very excited to see that Ulm, or however you say the name of the game, is now on Yukata, the online system. I'm trying to learn this game, and there's like, it's a little bit heavier than I thought it was. Like everything that I saw about Ulm seemed to suggest that this is a Euro game that would be, I figured, kind of along the lines of an easygoing, like a lighter Stefan Feld. He's got his like light and heavy games, it seems like, and then Castle Burgundy is somewhere in the middle. But a lot of his lighter games I figured to be like that. But no, Ulm has like a basic game, an advanced game, and I'm trying to digest it. I think it's really cool. Whenever they add a game to Yukata, it really makes me want to get that one tried. So I'm very excited for that. I've now finished the rules to Cerebria. Cerebria is the team game. It's a team game that can go from you can play it solo as a co-op, or it can go 2 to 6 players. I mean, you can have up to 6 players total. I believe you need to maybe add an expansion to play actually with 6 because you have to play with the balance. I'm not 100% sure, but I know that in the base game that I've finished the rules for, it is a 2 to 4 player experience where you've got a team sort of structure, and you will choose variable player powers, which give you essentially a different constructed deck for the game. You can actually build your own deck pre-constructed out of a slew of cards, out of a bunch of different, kind of like Codex style, but you're never adding cards as the game goes on. You start with 16 cards. You can upgrade those cards that you get to the more intense versions of each of them. There's a basic and an advanced version of every card. But basically what you're going to be doing is fighting over area control for realms and frontiers of the mind. And every realm has an action that you can take, and you're always able to take these actions. On your turn, you take 3 actions, and the frontiers, though, allow you to place in 2 different realms, and you get discounts for controlling realms. You get a discount when taking that action. For controlling frontiers, you have additional discounts throughout the game. On top of that, you are building actions on a player board, and every time that you take an action, you're going to have the potential to have an upgraded effect as long as you've previously researched that upgrade and are willing to pay to use it. I really like the way that this system seems to look. It is absolutely beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. This has got to be one of the best looking games I've ever seen. I'd say that from my perspective, being able to appreciate the fact that there are personifications of each of these different emotions, I think it is just beautiful. It makes me think of Salvador Dali meets Pixar. It is like inside out, inside the mind of a genius artist. I do love the production so much. I think that it's beautiful. I think that the gameplay here, it's going to be a very different, unique experience. Everything that I've played from Mind Clash games, their previous Tricerion and Anachrony. Anachrony I didn't like as much as I like Tricerion, but it's all about getting the most points. In Cerebria, it's less about getting points. I mean, yes, points are the big drive of the game. There's a way that everything is worth points, but it's more about sort of tactical short-term goals and how you're able to juggle those and try to get as many of those to happen at once. And you sort of reset. It's like you're playing a bunch of little duels. Like a round is almost like a duel. At the end of every scoring round, you're going to then take a look at whether or not you've accomplished your personal goal, and then there's a common goal. And if you get both of those, you get mega points, but then your opponent gets they get sort of more control over what scores in the future. So, I mean, there's a lot of different balancing aspects here. I'm really looking forward to seeing how the different sides, which are gloom and bliss, how they feel different. Each of the abilities in this game seems to be tied thematically to what it's supposed to do. There's anxiety in the game, which, everything about this game as well, I think it's almost helpful to look at a lot of the feelings that are inside of our heads, just from a mental health perspective, as like ideas and almost like little people up on our shoulder. We don't have to listen to those feelings, like getting control of your own emotions is part of the challenge of being human. I feel like Cerebria could actually be a step towards understanding like how your mind, how these different feelings and thoughts can be, like if you don't see yourself as the originator of them, you can actually maybe tame them a little bit better. Anyway, there's a lot of different complex thoughts about that, but I really think that Cerebria is a game I'm looking forward to. It looks beautiful. And I also am looking forward to how the balance expansion, which now adds like sort of neutral players. I've not read anything about it, but it's an extra expansion that comes in the Kickstarter version. And I also I would have to comment, I've tried to read the solo rules. And goodness gracious, the solo rules to this game seem to almost want to teach you strategy for how the game should be played, because you have to make a lot of decisions that are sort of, figuring out a focus and figuring out the most efficient action for a computer. And honestly, when I'm making decisions for myself, it's kind of tough to then have to try to make decisions and project my game onto a computer player. That's why I want my computer players to be sort of programmed and to get unfair advantages, but that's because they don't have that ability to make the optimal move. I feel like having to optimize a solo player almost does that thing, Andy, that you were talking about with where you can play 2-player, but you kind of have to take both sides. And it almost kind of turned me off of wanting to play this game solo. It just seems like there's just too much judgment that seemed to come into case. Every single paragraph was about sort of teaching me strategy about how the game's supposed to be played, and then how I'm supposed to play for the solo, for the bot.
Yeah. The only way I found to kind of get around that when you're in that situation is what I did with supply lines was I didn't set out to play it in one sitting. I set out to play it over the course of 3 days. And so I would make a move with one side and then purposely get up, go do something, and come back and look at it from the viewpoint of the other side. But if I tried to switch back and forth in the moment, it was really hard to do.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. So it can be kind of tough to learn how to play a solo game when you're having to make decisions for the computer. I just, that seems difficult to me. By the way, welcome to all those folks that are now listening. We got a lot of new listeners came in a crowd. I have feelings about, all right, let's put it like this. I have some presumptions about who those individuals might be. Some people I might see next Thursday, a week from today. So see you in the future. Maybe some of you come up and say hi to me. Anyway, that's my hype for this episode. I'm excited for and I am looking forward to trying Cerebria, a team-style game about the forces at work inside your head. Now moving on to Andy, who's going to top our entire episode off here with a nice look at the, I would say, a widely released game that's getting a lot of attention from some connoisseur gamers.
Yeah. So the game I'm going to hype is War Chest. This wasn't a game I was immediately intrigued by, but more and more people I know and respect in the board game hobby have been telling me that I really should try this, and it would be kind of up my alley. But it's kind of a bag builder with these cool coins, and then it's kind of you use those coins you draw from the bag to take kind of things on this abstract board. But what looks like it's going to be cool about it is you start off with a training thing where they say, okay, use these characters. But once you start getting into that, you can be no, I'm going to use archers this time, or I'm going to use this time, to change up the way the abstract game is played. It looks to be a 2-player game. You can play sub an hour. So that's pretty cool. So I'm just interested to see it because, like I said, a lot of people have recommended this to me as a game that they think I would like, and not ironically. So anyway, that's War Chest I'm interested to try. Probably the only other thing I'm really looking forward to right now is I have a copy of Meltwater from Hollandspiel coming. In Meltwater, the subtitle is a game of tactical starvation. So it's basically World War III happened, the Cold War went hot, and the only people left alive are on Antarctica. And it's kind of like America and the Soviet Union and a few neutrals. And the Soviet Union and America is nah, one of us has to win. So like they're going to fight it out even when the world's dying around you. So at some point, yeah, you're the only ones left standing, and then you're like looking at your world that's left and go.
I thought this game, Andy, when you described it, was about the wrestling season.
Yeah.
Tactical starvation.
Well, no, it's really cool too, because like since it's an abstract, it's got like a sort of hex grid thing, right?
Mm.
And every round you're adding like the radiation from the rest of the world is creeping in. So like the game space keeps getting more and more condensed, forcing you together until basically like either Americans or the Soviet Unions will be left. Just, you know, essentially what happens
bastion of hope before it falls, and then you win.
Yeah, there's no bastion of hope. It's like, no, the radiation will move in and we will be an extinct species of human. But by God, we beat the Russians.
We still beat the Russians, and now it's like the way that the first version of Greenland was written, right, Andy? That you kept on playing until
everyone's gonna die.
Everybody dies, because that's the historical accuracy.
Oh, and the best part was like to get this game. I got money from my mother-in-law who just gave me a check and wrote games ? On it. So like I used it to buy This Guilty Land and Meltwater. So when I see her next and she's like, so what games did you get? I bought ones about cute fluffy bunnies, because I don't want to tell her. It's like, oh, I bought this cool game about slavery, and then a cool game about the end of the world and like how pessimistic it's going to be, because I don't want to make her feel bad. So
you know,
yeah, that's what I'm looking forward to.
Very cool. I realized that I totally forgot to mention a pretty big event that happened over my Christmas break. That was a lot of games. I was able to try a lot of kids' games, because I have my brother's girlfriend is a kindergarten teacher, and so she got a lot of games for Christmas, and I showed her how to play a lot of these games that were like kids' games. And one of them is a Reiner Knizia designed roll and move and spin. You not only roll and move, you also spin something in the middle of the game. You flick it and spin it, and that's like a witch that can zap you and turn you into a frog. And then it's like got a memory aspect, because all the frogs, like all the players look the same when they're frogs. It is literally like the most simple roll and move, spin and move you can imagine, where you're just trying to like either move 3 spaces or move like, you know, you're trying to get a crystal and then get back. Get a crystal and get back. And it's just a simple board. But you can tell that it has that mathematical basis for like the risk that you're taking and what can happen. But it has a spinner and a roll and move. Yeah, I played one that was both. And we had a grand old time playing it. It seemed like it would be really good for her kindergartners. She thought that she could definitely get them up and running and playing the game. And it had felt glued onto a wooden piece and painted. It was like this amazing, amazing piece. I'm talking about the game Mago Magino. It's, I don't know, like just the way that it's spelled, Magomagino. But a Reiner Knizia designed roll and move and spinning. Not exactly a spin and move, more like spin and now your movement sucks because you're a frog. But I played that game, Animal Upon Animal. There was one called the Corridor. It was about mice trying to get across a maze that players are building as they're playing the game. So a very cool game called Corridor as well. And just a bunch of games for a kindergarten classroom. So I now realize that I should have put this in earlier in the episode, but it was a pretty big moment. I appreciate everybody here at the end. Those of you, the few, the proud that are still listening, it was a very cool opportunity there that I got to play some kids games before those games will get used in a kindergarten classroom. That little aside is what's going to end this episode of The Good, the Bored, and the Ugly. So thanks, Trent, for putting together such an awesome, intriguing list of games that I understand, and games I've never played, and games I want to play now. Andy, it's good having you. And everybody listening now, thanks for checking us out this week, and I hope you have a great week of gaming and whatever else you do. And then catch us next week on The Good, the Bored, and the Ugly.